Good morning to one half of the greatest group of people I know. Well, this morning it looks like 1/3. We got a little empty section over here. That's because we have some big events happening today. The first and the most notable is probably the reason why we're a little down in the early service, because after the second service, we will be having a going away celebration for one of our longest tenured shepherds here, and that's Brother Dave Case. And I have to say, and I'm sure that we'll mention a lot about he and his sweet wife at our get-together this afternoon, but I have to say, he along with the others, he's one of the finest men and shepherds I've ever known. And I hope that if you can come back after that second service to honor them, that you'll make that opportunity if at all possible. I'd also like to invite you this evening to come back for Sunday Night Live. That's what we call our Sunday night service. And my son, Seth Williams, he's leaving tomorrow forever and heading down to Alabama for a summer internship. But he's been preaching, as you know, and will take on the family business, so to speak. And so he'll be preaching tonight. So I hope you'll come back for that as well. This morning, we're going to be talking a little bit about a subject that I think is perhaps the second most rare of all virtues and qualities, and the most problematic. The first extinct virtue, or near extinct virtue, we're finding in our world is holiness, godliness. We're living in a society that's becoming more and more carnal every day, more and more worldly all the time. But this second one was a virtue that was much more prominent in years gone by, in the past. In fact, in my grandpa's generation, I think it was somewhat across the board as far as that greatest generation and the quality that they exhibited in their work, in their life, in their home, in their family. But today, as we consider this, I want to ask you a question, kind of take a little survey. The other day I was on the phone with the airline because we have a whole bunch of family, in fact they're taking up a couple rows here, who have come in for graduation and all of that and are staying at Hotel Williams. Now I will advise you that Hotel Williams is not quite as fancy as some of the nicer ones like Motel 6, but they have come and they're staying with us. So we've been working out travel and all of this. So for our daughter Reagan, I had to call the airline. And as I'm waiting for the airline representative, they asked me, would you be willing to stay on the line and take a survey after this call? If so, please answer number 1. If not, please push number 2. I don't know whoever answers number 1. I mean, I didn't want to do that afterwards, but I have had to take those before because, occasionally they'll have you do it before you talk to someone. And they're usually a multiple choice type of questionnaire. So I'm going to ask you a multiple choice questionnaire. All of them just have 2 choices, A and B. So I ask you, if you are on a sports team, which one would you rather be on? One that wins most of the time, or one that always gets beaten? Okay, think about it. Log your answer in your mind. Secondly, if you are at a job, which would you rather be at? How would you like your work life to go? A, you're appreciated for your work, and they give you promotions, and they give you awards. Or B, nobody cares if you're there or not. They never appreciate you. They never give you any raises. Okay, A or B? Log that answer in your mind. All right. In your life, if I were to talk about education, when you were in school, which would you rather have? A, you do your work, you're never stressed about it, rarely stressed about it, and you get good marks and you're appreciated by your teachers. Or B, all of the unfortunate things that are opposite of that. you're stressed, you have to stay up late, and you have to right before you cram for the finals, and you turn in subpar work. That's B. A or B. As a parent, as you're raising children, which kind of child would you rather have? A child who never embarrasses you in public, or rarely. That in the grocery store, they say, Mommy, can I have a candy bar? And you say, no, not today. You've already had enough sugar. And this child says, okay, Mom. Or, I want my candy bar! Screaming and hollering. And all of the folks are looking at you, judging you. They are. I know, because all of us judge people when that happens, right? I mean, in all frankness. Okay? How about this? If you have a pet, you have a dog. Would you rather have a pet that you can walk around the neighborhood, no leash, it'll just stay right there, and when you stop, that pet sits down and just waits for you to move, and you say, I'm going to go talk, stay. And you walk over and talk to your neighbor, and that dog just stays and waits till you call it over. Or would you rather have this? You know what I'm talking about? A or B? Has everybody taken the test? Each one of the 5 questions, they're each worth 20%. Right? Taught too many classes in my time. How many of you had a lot of A's? How many of you had quite a few B's? No. My goodness, you folks are just exceptional test takers. In fact, who had all A's? Have you figured out what the sermon's about yet? The lost virtue of our society that always produces A, and the opposite, the lack of this virtue always produces B, is the word discipline. Discipline. Whether we're talking about discipline as a parent towards a child, as a pet owner towards a pet, or more importantly than all of those, because it precedes the others, is discipline over ourselves. Self-control, as the Bible will name it. And there was a time when self-control was a common attribute. But it's not anymore. In fact, we look at so many problems in our culture and the root, and I know we talk about, well, we just need more education and this is going to fix this problem. Drugs or crime or violence or whatever it is. Or we need more of this and it'll fix this problem. Or if we just had better social services, it would fix this problem. Let me tell you, I'm not against more education. I'm not certainly against more social services or helping more people when they're down. But the reality is you can't help people who will not help themselves. You cannot help people, you cannot change a person's life if they're going to choose B. Now, nobody consciously says, I want those things. But the crazy thing about life is the results are always predictable of how life will turn out, determined by how much discipline a person is willing to exercise. Folks, it's really the most simplistic, eye-opening reality probably that there is, that you can absolutely predict what kind of, from the most insignificant things, what kind of pet you're going to have, or what kind of grades you're going to get, or what kind of appreciation you're going to get at work, or what kind of children you're going to raise. All of the above are determined by how much self-discipline, self-control we begin to exercise in our own lives. As we walk through this world, it is a sobering reality that our society is rapidly losing this and so many other marks of character. I read it recently that when God looks at you on that final day, He will not look for medals. He will look for scars. He won't look for participation trophies. He's going to look, and when we say scars, it doesn't mean necessarily just those that are caused by the struggle that's not against flesh and blood, but against the princes, principalities, and powers of wickedness in the heavenly places. But Paul says the struggle is not just against those enemies. We only have two enemies to conquer: the devil and the one we see in the mirror. That's why Paul says, I buffet my body daily to bring it under subjection. What's amazing about this is we live in a society where the experts who have the highest level of credentialing and education now tell people on talk shows, on TV, no, you should just do what your heart tells you to do. You know, the funny thing is my emotions, my heart, have never told me to do the hard thing. Have they you? My emotions say I want to win the game. But they say I don't want to practice two-a-days, like my son will be doing soon, in 100-degree Alabama heat with 90% humidity. Nobody wants to do that. But everybody wants to win. But here's the thing. This world has always been the same, and it will never change. The person who does the hard thing, who buffets his body, who controls his will and his actions and his words and his attitudes and his thoughts, that person ends up in column A every time. And even if he temporarily is in column B, guess where he ends up again? Column A. Yet, we live in a world where it is being amazingly devalued as time goes on. Discipline is hard because here's the thing. Excellence is hard. And the reason you know excellence is hard is because we have the word excellence. If we didn't, there would just, be no distinction for that which rises above, which achieves more. Excellence is special. It's unique. It's better. It's different. It's hard. And therefore, that which is most important to achieve excellence, and I'm telling you, we have ideas that so many things are so important. We think that, well, if our kids are smart, that's what I want my kids to be smart. I'd rather my kids be average and be disciplined than be smart. Or I wish my kids would be talented. I'd rather my kids be average and disciplined than extremely talented. Because here is one of the greatest quotes and truths ever mentioned. The disciplined rule the world. Think back to Daniel chapter 6. You remember that text? That's the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And Darius, the king of the Medes and Persians, he is setting up his kingdom. It's just been taken by he and Cyrus from the line of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And so he's setting up his kingdom, and he puts all of these kind of administrators over different areas. And then over them he sets up three, one of which is Daniel. And the Bible tells us, but Daniel excelled even over the other two and over everyone else, because in everything he did, he found excellence. Everything he did, he went the extra mile. He gave the extra 10%. And in that, the result was even the king, this young man who had started off as a slave in chains, drugged from his home country a nothing in everyone else's eyes, ends up being one of the three most powerful men besides the king in the entire world. And the king notices him, not by Daniel. Look at me, look at me. No. Because of the excellence of his work, which was developed from the discipline of his character. And it's excellence. To find excellence requires work. It's hard. I read one scholar who was giving advice on what it means to really know the Bible to young ministers. And he made a statement. If you want to become a scholar of New Testament literature, you must say goodbye to comics forever. And we understand the point. Is it requires a focus, a desire, a determination to master oneself. Well, I want to say just a few things about this idea of self-control this morning. First of all, self-control is the key, not just to power in our lives in this world, but more importantly than that, self-control is the key to spiritual power. Without a doubt, it is we've already mentioned this, but without a doubt, it is the greatest ally of the successful. Self-discipline is that which, next to virtue, truly, essentially raises one person over another. Joseph Addison, the English poet, said that long ago. Roy L. Smith wrote, "Discipline is the refining fire by which talent becomes ability." The most beautiful works of art that have ever been produced in this world were produced with great labor and painstaking detail by someone who exercised discipline. Great works of art are not produced in those little classes you go to. They advertise these places. Come paint and have your birthday party here. And you go and they show you how to paint. The funny thing is, none of those hang in the Louvre. None of them. Because those works of art are just they're for fun, right? And they're a good thing, they're for fun. But everybody knows, I'm not working on excellence here. I'm working on something that, I might hang in the garage. Not in the Louvre. Yet, it's so tempting for people to live their life by I'll just go produce the quick painting at the party idea. Rather than I will determine and devote myself to excellence. George Washington, our first president, said, "Discipline is the soul of an army. It makes small numbers formidable. It procures success to the weak and esteem to all." And Napoleon said, if you give me half a dozen fully disciplined men who are masters of themselves, I will conquer the world. But without self-discipline, the truth is we can never find excellence. We can never even find adequacy in regard to our spiritual selves, which is the most important thing. Because the woman who find great achievement in their work, even if they were to raise an exceptional family with children that are a picture of what you want them to be, even if their marriage is outstanding and their relationships are the highest quality, if that person has failed in their spiritual life, then they're still a failure and not a success. So the most important area that this has to be applied is, of course, in control to ourselves and our spiritual lives. When we look in Romans chapter 7, there's the text where the Apostle Paul is being very frank about man and our struggles. And he says, "For we know that," in verse 14, "that the law is spiritual, but I am of flesh, sold into bondage to sin. For that which I am doing, I do not understand. For I do not practice that which I would like to do, but I am doing the very thing that I hate. Now, everyone in here who has striven for holiness and godliness in your life understands that sentiment, that emotion. The things which I'm doing, I do not understand, I do not want to do, but the things that I do are the very things that I hate. Those of you who've striven for holiness in your life and said to yourself, I'm never going to say that again. I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to think that again. And I commit to you, Lord. But then a day or a month or a year later, what happened? Maybe you said it again. Maybe you did it again. Maybe you thought it again. And you felt like Paul and said, well, I want to master this body. The hardest thing in the world to master is you. It's the greatest challenge. It is the impossible dream, the unreachable star that we have to press on and attempt to conquer again every day, especially right after we fail. Paul says, the things which I'm doing, I do not understand. Verse 16, but I do the very thing I do not wish to do. And I agree with the law, confessing that it is good. So now no longer am I the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. For the wishing is present in me, but the doing of the good is not. For the good I wish I do not do, but I practice the evil I do not wish. But I am doing the very thing I do not wish. Paul's point in all of this is that the flesh is difficult to master. And this is one reason we talk frequently about, well, being a Christian, we should never present it as easy. And we kind of mean that oftentimes because of persecution or temptation or difficulty. But I think the most apparent reason why being a Christian is a difficult challenge is not because of necessarily all of the things that come from outside. It's all of the things we must have to master on the inside. The mastery of ourselves. Paul says, that's my greatest struggle. That's my greatest enemy. Because we have in this world, not a sinful nature as it's often preached by the Calvinists and others that were born in sin. No, you weren't born in sin. Jesus wouldn't have said, if any man should come to me, he must become as a little child. I mean, every example of perfection and purity used by Jesus has to do with little children. They're not born in sin. But I'll tell you, the moment you draw your first breath in this world starts to corrupt you. And we do have a sarx, that's the Greek word for flesh or sinful nature as it's translated in some versions. We have that begins the day we start in this world, take our first breath, get on the playground at a young age and begin to say words like no and mine. It starts to work on us and corrupt us. And we live in a world, that's why Adam sinned. Have you ever noticed that in the book of Romans, as it talks about Adam seems to be very harshly criticized by the Holy Spirit through Paul? Because, like this, I don't know that I'd want to go down in history with this said about me. As in Adam, all die. But in Christ, all will be made alive. Can you imagine that? That's pretty heavy weight of the world on your shoulders. Everybody who's ever lived, as in Adam, all die. Why was Adam's sin so grievous? It doesn't say as in Eve, all die. Now, it does tell us in 1 Timothy, for Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not the one deceived. And that's in the context of the roles of women in the body. But it's not just being critical of Eve because of her sin. And I've heard us joke, I've heard fellas say, well, thanks. If Eve hadn't eaten the fruit, then we wouldn't have all this sin. No, hold on. If Adam had been a man and a leader in his family, when she said, eat this with me, and he knew it was wrong. He wasn't deceived. That's what that text tells us in 1 Timothy. Adam wasn't deceived. He knew exactly what he was doing. And he did it anyway. And it caused him to die and her to die. So when Adam did that, and the reason his sin was so grievous is he couldn't quote Romans 7 like all of us can, and Paul could, and that apply to us. You know, it's hard because we have a sinful nature, a flesh, a sarx in Greek, and that pulls at us. I mean, the easy thing to do is seldom the right thing to do. That's why discipline's so hard. What's the easy thing to do? The lazy thing. What's the easy thing to do? The feel-good thing. What's the easy thing to do? The shortcut. But you know what? It wasn't that way for Adam. Because everything in your world pushes you to do the wrong thing. And you have to push back with extreme spiritual discipline. Adam didn't. The garden, did it influence him to do evil? The Garden of Eden? Oh no. How about his companions? Well, he had two. He had Eve. She did kind of influence him, but he knew what he was doing. He didn't have to listen. But what about his other companion that he walked with every day in the garden? God. Satan didn't have control and he wasn't influential in everything yet. You see, Adam's entire world encouraged him. Do the right thing. Do the right thing. Your entire world, my entire world, Paul's entire world says, do the wrong thing. Do the wrong thing. That's why in Adam all die. Because Adam changed this world. His sin changed the dynamics by which every other human being would live. So that now, the world is our enemy. Our environment is our enemy. Our heart is our own enemy. Our body is our own enemy. And the greatest thing to master is our own selves. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul will state this in another way that was read for us just a few moments ago. He says in verse 25, for everyone who competes in the games exercises control in all things. They do it that they will receive a perishable crown, a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore I run in such a way as not to aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I buffet my body and I make it a slave, lest possibly, after I have preached to others, I should myself be disqualified. Paul says, my number one adversary is me. Self-control is the key to spiritual power. Secondly, self-control is the ladder. It is the rungs through which we climb in regard to spiritual maturity. That's how we grow. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 8 says, now for this reason also, applying all diligence in your faith, supply moral excellence. And in your moral excellence, knowledge. And in your knowledge, self-control. And in your self-control, perseverance. And in your perseverance, godliness. And in your godliness, brotherly kindness. And your brotherly kindness, love. For these qualities are yours and are increasing. They render you neither useless nor unfruitful in the true knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Notice that this is a ladder of spiritual growth and maturity. He says, take each rung one by one. The other ladder we read in the New Testament is, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. And what's the last rung of the ladder? Self-control. Self-mastery. That's because, folks, it takes a lifetime to develop self-mastery, to develop self-control. And it has to be the objective. You have to be struggling at climbing that ladder every single day. To be like Jesus, we must gain control. And folks, we need to hear this, because sometimes I think Christians excuse, because we've been influenced by the world, lack of self-control in one or more of these areas. But to be like Jesus, we have to model His self-discipline and self-control over our appetites. And we all know that. In other words, the things our body craves. Over our emotions. Do you know you can master your emotion? We have more prescription drugs given for depression and for anxiety than ever before in the history of the world. And that's incredible, because they didn't issue those drugs. They didn't have a lot of them. But during a time in this country, during the Great Depression, when people didn't have anything at all, and people didn't know where their next can of beans were coming from, yet they had less depression. That's really interesting. Read The Grapes of Wrath. You'll see. They were able to find joy. And how is that possible? You say, well, we just don't know. I'm going to make a suggestion. Maybe people in years gone by, because they practiced self-discipline in every area of their life, maybe they not only disciplined themselves in work and in family, maybe they disciplined how they felt. Perhaps they had self-mastery over their emotions as well. It can be done. Now, that doesn't mean if a person needs some help that that's not needed sometimes. I'm not trying to suggest that. But I am saying we don't need to simply give in to an idea that, well, I can't be in control of my emotions. Yes, we can. Our appetites, our emotions, our moods. Our moods. You know, you go to work and you got to deal with a boss that isn't everything he necessarily should be. Go to work and choose, discipline yourself to be happy. Because you should be a master of your moods and our speech. Our speech. Appetites, emotion, moods, speech. These are all part of mankind that impact and affect who we are spiritually. Jesus had control of all of those things, didn't He? His appetites, He could fast for 40 days. His emotions, Jesus, he was angry at times when He decided it was the right thing to do. But He never lost His temper. His moods. Jesus had more reason. He was the Son of sorrows. Man of sorrows. He had, the Son of Man hath no place to lay His head. I mean, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay His head. But you look at Jesus and He's optimistic and He's hope-filled. Because He had mastery over His moods and His speech. During the term of President Lyndon Johnson, he got to be somewhat overweight. And one day, Lady Bird Johnson, in her typical way, challenged him with a blunt assertion. She said, "My good husband, President of the United States, you can't run the country if you can't run yourself." Well, Not many people could talk that way to Lyndon Johnson except her. But because of that wise observation, he lost 23 pounds. Because that's true. Folks, you can't run your family. Not the way God would have you. If you can't run yourself. Church leaders, we can't run the church of God if we can't run ourselves. Workers, you can't run your department. You can't run your business if you can't run yourself. It is the ladder. Self-control is the ladder of spiritual maturity. And the last thing that we have to observe, and this one goes out to folks who have started down the road of mastery, who have developed some self-discipline, and that is, I want to say, self-control, self-discipline without holiness is empty. And we need to say this because the one true danger to the self-discipline is the seductive sin of pride. You see, because disciplined people, here's just the truth of it. Disciplined people have a lot of accomplishments. They do. They will. They're going to, whatever they set their mind to and whatever they decide to do in their life, they're going to be, and in the end, because part of discipline is determination, they're going to come out on top. So here's the danger of it. Especially when you look at other folks who aren't quite as far along that journey of self-discipline as you are. Oh, it can become very easy to think, wow, if he would just have done this. Well, it's his own fault. If he'd just pull himself up by his own straps. If he'd just, apply himself a little bit more. If he wanted to, you understand how this is probably all true, but it still can seat itself in the heart of the disciplined as pride. Discipline is a tool that should be used by the foundation of holiness. You see, disciplined folks need to memorize Ephesians 2:8 and 9 and quote it all the time in their mind. For we are saved by grace through faith. It is the gift of God, not by works, lest anyone should boast. Here's the thing, is that we're encouraging the power of discipline spiritually in your work life, in your family life, in every area of your life. And it will produce the A column, there's no doubt. But the danger is, which we have to remember, is there is no point at which I can perfect myself to the point where I deserve anything that God has given me. Anything. We have to always remember. And the more disciplined you become, the more you must remind yourself, I'm not worthy. And I'll never, ever be. Psalm 51:17. David says, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise. There is nothing as meaningful to God than to see, especially the person who has struggled to master and to discipline themselves, but to still, that's the thing about Daniel that's so beautiful. He did achieve all of that, but when he had any issue, where did he go? In fact, the very thing his accusers used against him is he would bow his head on his knees in prayer, in humble, absolute submission to his better on high. If we help this, if we realize this, it will help us with our spirituality, to protect our devotional life, to control our bodies, to take us to maturity. And I hope that our lesson today has served a few purposes. First of all, I hope that it has become an inspiration to those of you who have a little trouble, mastering things. Maybe you're always cramming for the tests at the end. Or perhaps you're the one who lets your dog drag you all over the neighborhood. Or perhaps you're the person who goes to work and you haven't disciplined your moods or your attitude, and it's just not turning out the way you want it to. I'm telling you, the disciplined rule the world. Master yourself, and the rest of it will fall in place. It's just absolutely true. Every single time. Guaranteed. I don't have to be a prophet to speak obvious truth. Discipline yourself. Wake up every day and decide, I'm going to master myself. So that when you stand before the throne, you can show God the scars. Not physical scars, but the scars not that have been inflicted by enemies, but where you've buffeted yourself, mastered yourself. But for those of you who have walked this road, you've had accomplishments. And the danger for you is pride. Make sure to always remember that we strive to excel for His glory and not for our own. If there's anyone here today that we can encourage, perhaps you just need to say, Lord, I need to get my life under control. I need to make a change. Today's a good day to do that. Or perhaps you need to say, Lord, I need to get my pride under control. I need to make a change. Whatever it is, if we can help you, if we can pray for you, encourage you, lift you up, come right now as we stand and as we sing.